So we meet again. Apparently an hour and a half of this wasn't enough for you, so how about another round? This is the Indoctrination Theory, a documentary 2! If you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, go right on ahead now and watch the first documentary. Go on, I'll still be here after you're done. Alright, so now that everybody has watched the first video, you might be wondering, what could possibly be left to talk about? Well, I thought about that too, but apparently the fans are a mighty force to reckon with, because in that short time since the original release of the documentary, there is even more information that has surfaced. I'm going to be covering all of it, as well as some things I intentionally left out in the first documentary, some things I've noticed myself, and I'm also going to be shooting down an idea or two that fans have been mulling over, as well as a few more things. In the last documentary, I covered all of the details step by step, going from as soon as we get hit with Harbinger's laser, all the way to when we see Shepard breathing. This time around, I'm retracing our steps, but this time we'll be starting with information and evidence that took place before Shepard gets hit with the beam, then chronologically following all of the steps we took in the first documentary, then talking about the final cutscenes and cinematics again, and then finally talking about a few pieces of evidence that have taken place outside of the game itself, as well as a few closing comments and speculation about the DLC. Also, if you haven't watched my radio interview yet with Video Game Sophistry, I highly suggest that you do so before watching this documentary, not just for personal gain. I answer 10 questions the fans have asked directly and talk about a few other things that serve as a very good connector between the first documentary and this one, kinda like how the Arrival DLC was the connector between Mass Effect 2 and Mass Effect 3. So now that you've watched the first documentary and the radio interview hopefully, let's jump right back into it for one more bout of fun. I'd like to start off by tackling one of the weirder things I've heard about since the first documentary. This one is about strange and unexplained noises coming from different parts of the Normandy as soon as we get to the part of the game where we're about to assault the Cerberus base. There are also some noises that are evidently present at other times during the game. The problem is, you literally have to crank your speakers to the maximum level in order to even faintly hear them. So quiet, in fact, that I literally can't even turn it up loud enough in this video for you to hear it well enough without you having to crank up your speakers. Why would BioWare put subtle clues like people laughing, crying, random footsteps, if they weren't going to put them in at a level audible enough to hear? They were already scrapped for time, so there's no way that they were going to include random stuff like this at random parts of the game. The noises are there, but in my opinion they have nothing to do with the theory itself, because if it did, then BioWare would have done so much more of an obvious thing. Again, it is a ship with a crew, after all. It makes sense for there to be ambient noises like that. So sorry guys and gals, I'm gonna have to slap this one with an X. The next topic isn't exactly a piece of evidence, but rather it's a question about the theory that has gone unaddressed publicly that has been asked by both critics and fans alike. The question is, why didn't the Prothean VIs, Vigil in Mass Effect 1, and then Vendetta in Mass Effect 3, detect Shepard's indoctrination? Well, that one actually has a pretty simple answer, especially if you were paying attention in the first documentary. It's because he's not indoctrinated, plain and simple. Remember, the whole point of this theory is saying that the final scenes of the game are just indoctrination attempts, rather than Shepard being fully indoctrinated? It wouldn't make sense for the indoctrination theory to exist in the first place if Shepard had already been indoctrinated, because if he had been, then he wouldn't need to make a choice in his head. He would just have automatically began to serve the Reapers. The VIs can't point out individuals that are trying to be indoctrinated, only individuals that have been fully indoctrinated. So yeah, this counter-argument by the critics of the theory gets a big fat F. Jumping off of that point into something that actually supports the theory, these VIs are not foolproof. This is explained by Vendetta when he says that there was a Prothean Splinter Cell group that broke off from society and tried to, guess what, control the Reapers. Sound familiar? The Protheans literally had an equivalent of the human Cerberus group, go figure. And the VIs never detected them until it was too late. They slipped right through the cracks according to Vendetta. So this not only further busts a hole through that last counter-argument, but it also helps me put a little extra spot of insight onto the control option at the end of the game. This wasn't just the elusive man's choice. It wasn't just Cerberus's choice. This was also the choice that a rogue Prothean group decided to try, and obviously they failed at it as well. Which leads me into my main point. Control has been the folly of everyone who has ever tried it. Their logic was the same that Shepard says at the end of the game. They couldn't control the Reapers, but I can. It's the same mistake that has been made 3 times already in the past that we know of, and now BioWare is giving Shepard and you the player another chance to make that same exact mistake once again. And if this has also been done by a group of Protheans who we thought were so intelligent and mystical, then who is to say that every single cycle hasn't had a Cerberus-like group that tried to adopt the control belief? But this is shrouded in confusion and mystery at the end of the game, and we are led to believe that we are seriously a superhuman, and that we can really control the Reapers just because we're Commander Shepard. But Shepard isn't divine. He's not the Mass Effect version of Neo from the Matrix. He's just a living being with a vulnerable brain, just like the Cerberus people, just like the Elusive Man, and just like the Protheans, all of which who have failed in trying to control the Reapers. All making the same mistake, and all believing that they could get away with it for the same reasons. There's no reason that an exception would be made for Commander Shepard, yet he still believes there is, and in turn, so do we. Which is exactly what everybody else has believed when they tried it. I said it at the start of this point, and I'll end with it as well. Control is the universal and repetitive folly of all who have lusted for power and dominance. The next piece of evidence is very, very subjective and very, very debatable, but it's something that a lot of people wanted me to discuss, so here it is. Way in the beginning of the game, the child can be seen hiding against the railing of the building that he runs into, staring vacantly at a Reaper who is seemingly staring right back at him. I feel some of the details have been lost during the repeated fan interpretations of this, because the Reaper itself is moving around and shooting lasers every now and then, whereas the piece of evidence that I heard says that the Reaper is supposed to be staring back at the kid without moving. So that part's not true. So far, it's just a scared kid staring at a giant monster. Nothing strange yet. So moving on. The first significant thing about this whole scene is when Shepard encounters the first husks in the game crawling up the side of the building. We can see the kid run into the building at this time. But wait, did he just run through a locked door? As someone who has played every game in the series about 5 times each, I have never seen this before. Nowhere else in the series does an NPC run into an explicitly locked door. If you can find me an example, I ask that you kindly point it out to me, but if you don't see an annotation here correcting myself, then it's safe to assume that nobody has found any other instance of this either. Critics will likely just cast this off as a graphical glitch, and they might be right, but my rebuttal to them is this. If it's a graphical glitch, then why haven't we seen it anywhere else in the series? Besides, it's just a door. There's seriously not much that can go wrong with a door graphic, and it's worked flawlessly thousands of other times in the series. Why didn't it now? Furthermore, any quality assurance member, those are the people who sit around all day and play games that are unreleased looking for bugs and glitches. Even the most inexperienced Q&A tester of all time would have noticed this in a heartbeat. Honestly, I could probably take this to an old folks home and they'd probably all notice it immediately. And BioWare has a massive QA testing team. How did none of them notice something that is so poignantly placed in front of the player? I'm totally okay with casting pieces of evidence off as laziness and chalking things down to graphical problems, but this one is ridiculous. The scene of the child running into the building is obviously very important to the story arc, indoctrination theory or not. So how did they let a graphical glitch like that slip by during an important scene unless it was intended? It should have been noticed in the very first QA test ever done for the demo of the game and then removed. Why wasn't it? It's either that hundreds of quality assurance testers aren't doing their job, or that it was intended. What do you think? But because I'm certain that my explanation just isn't going to be enough for most of the nitpicky critics out there, I'm going to be forced to apply a plausible label here, even though my heart says confirmed. Now, there's more to discuss here. A minute after the kid runs into the building and hides inside the air ducts, the entire building gets decimated by a Reaper beam. Yet, the kid survives? I've said it before and I'll say it again. How in the great kingdom of Candyland is this possible? I'm no physics major, but I know enough about taking hot things out of the oven with my bare hands to know that the heat coming off of the laser, in conjunction with the explosion we just witnessed, should have been enough to cook that kid alive like a Thanksgiving turkey, stuffing and all. I mean, he's hiding inside an air duct. Air ducts are made from sheet metal. I should know, I've built houses before. All of the heat being thrown into the building to make it explode would immediately be conducted onto that air duct, and that kid would have been flopping around inside it like a fish out of water. This proves that the kid isn't real, plain and simple, either that or he's a superhuman. But damn you critics, I know what you're thinking. It's just a game mechanic, it's just an oversight, it's lazy writing, it's not a big deal, it's just something to help the story flow better. I hate those answers, but I respect everyone's opinion, and that's why this is getting slapped with another plausible, but again, my heart wants to give it a confirmed. But I've saved the best for last with this scene. Remember the very beginning of the game, the very first cinematic? We see Shepard looking out of a window watching the kid play with his toy. First of all, this kid is on a rooftop in the middle of nowhere by himself, completely unattended. Some people say that this place looks like a park, but I'm not sure I agree. Either way, that's irrelevant. The most important thing about this park is that it's not there later on in the game. You can clearly see the same building that the kid was on during the opening cinematic, but there's no park on top of it now, it's just an empty rooftop. Why make the extra effort to remodel the building and remove the park? Don't you think that's a little silly? But that's not even the most important thing. The important thing is that the kid just went from that building all the way to the building we find him at later. How the hell is that possible? First of all, the building we saw the kid playing on was not connected to the building Shepard saw him from. So right off the bat, we know that the kid doesn't have a straight path to the building when we find him in, unlike Anderson and Shepard, who both have a clear straight shot from the building we start in to the building that explodes. Now, the kid on the other hand would have had to descend from the rooftop of the building he was on, run the length that looked to be 2 or 3 times longer than the path that Anderson and Shepard take, and finally, he would have had to scale the side of the building that we find him on, which was like 10 stories up. I mean, he could have taken the elevator when he finally reaches the final building, but by the time he made it to the entrance of the building, the attack would have already been started, and I'm pretty sure he would have come across somebody on the streets who were all running away from those buildings. Why would the kid enter a building that everyone is running out of? Why wouldn't any of them stop to help a little boy? This one makes zero sense to me. I want so badly to give this a confirmed. My finger is on the trigger, but I can't do it, because I know the critics are gonna cry wolf once again and say, lazy story developing! So another plausible it is. Now, time to move on, or rather, time to move back. I want to discuss the Arrival DLC now, and whether or not it's possible for the Reapers to have been trying to indoctrinate Shepard ever since that point. In the DLC, Shepard is captured by people who are obviously indoctrinated. They have been working on a project to make people indoctrinated, as evidenced by some of the journal logs that they kept around the base. Do you know what's really neat? In the only 2 logs kept by the only 2 participants in the study, both reported having recurring nightmares and dreams while undergoing the indoctrination process. Sound familiar? This is more than a mere coincidence. Shepard's recurring dreams clearly were meant to have intent with them. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been so much emphasis placed upon them. But now that this piece of evidence is in our minds, we can actually see past proof put in by the developers themselves that is saying that what Shepard is experiencing are actually proven legitimate signs of indoctrination. This gets it confirmed because it's a supporting piece of evidence made by the developers. Now, continuing off of the Arrival storyline, when Shepard is captured, he is held captive and put under sedatives for 2 days and an hour approximately. Shepard wakes up on a medical table much like he does at the beginning of Mass Effect 2, and fights his way out. This part proves a few things. The first is that the Reapers don't want to kill Shepard, but rather they just want to indoctrinate him. Otherwise, they would have killed him instead of capturing him. Watch any dialogue during the Object Rho holdout, they explicitly state that they want to capture him. So if that was their goal during the Arrival DLC, why wouldn't it be their goal during Mass Effect 3? Literally nothing has changed since then. Furthermore, at the very end of the Arrival DLC, we see Shepard talking to a projection of Harbinger. Harbinger tells Shepard, "Your mind will be ours." The Arrival DLC is the last chronological event that happens before Mass Effect 3. We open Mass Effect 3 with Shepard looking at the child out of a window. Coincidence? I don't think so. That's the Reapers just doing what they said they were going to do, attempting to take control of Shepard's mind, and it's working as shown by Shepard's sudden psychological plummet from the events in Mass Effect 2 to the events in Mass Effect 3. Anyway, the second thing that is proven by Shepard waking up on a medical bed shows that they were doing experiments on him to at least some degree. Who knows what they did to him while he was asleep, but the bottom line is that he was exposed to a Reaper artifact for over 2 days. That is plenty of time to kickstart the indoctrination process, as shown by numerous Mass Effect novels, codex entries, and logs found throughout the series. With this knowledge at hand, it would be the largest plot hole yet for Shepard to have never felt the effects of indoctrination throughout the entire series, despite this build-up alluding to it. To recap, the Reapers want Shepard alive and indoctrinated, as proven by their own statements and actions. It is also confirmed that Shepard was exposed to a Reaper artifact long enough for the effects and intents of indoctrination to start. This is confirmed by the game, regardless of whether you're a critic, a supporter of the theory, or just somebody watching the video. It's simply proven fact. I want to interject an extremely tiny topic that some people have asked. Why don't the Mass Effect relays destroy the Soul system and the other systems when they explode in the ending, when the detonation of the one in the Arrival DLC wiped out that entire system? Well, basically it's because this one is a controlled explosion. I also believe that this has been confirmed via Twitter by Casey Hudson, but I wasn't able to find the tweet. Anywho, if you think about it, it makes sense that Shepard would dream that this is a controlled explosion, or that it is a real one. Whichever ends up being true, both scenarios make sense. Because he obviously wouldn't dream about them killing everybody, right? He would dream that he made the right decision, so this isn't something I wanted to put a confirmed, plausible, or busted label onto. This is just something I wanted to talk about. So, moving on. There's one more thing that a few people have wanted me to talk about in regard to the Arrival DLC. The hallucination Shepard has if he fails the mission. If you let the timer run out during the game, then you die, but first Shepard has an unexplained cutscene that flashes in his mind. It comes and goes in a flash of only 10 seconds, so I took the video and dissected it frame by frame, and I found some interesting stuff. There are images and video clips that were never present anywhere else in the entire series, meaning that they all just created this specifically for this one 10-second clip that most people weren't even going to see. This is extremely significant, because if this was just another death or just another mission failure, they wouldn't have wasted their time, yet the developers went the extra mile to compile all of this new stuff into a 10-second video. More on that in a second, but first let's look at what's in the video. First we see an image of Shepard's head on a pike with a broken down Mako in the background, and gets a background that looks eerily similar to the final run down the hill scene of the game. This image gets replayed throughout the 10-second scene. Next there is a frame of the Reapers coming through the mass relays. Next, we see a specifically rendered clip of a Reaper inside the Citadel, walking around and shooting lasers every which way. Next is a split-second frame of when the Normandy exploded during Mass Effect 2. Then we see images of more Reapers. Then we see Shepard's head on a pike thing again, but this time there's no glowing beam in the background. So with this improved clarity, now it looks a lot like the planet that the Normandy crash landed onto. Next we see a Reaper in a place that looks, to me, a lot like Ilium. That's the place where Liara worked for before the Shadow Broker DLC. Next we see yet another image of another Reaper, but this one looks strikingly similar to Harbinger. But do you notice the red ring around him? This looks exactly like a recolored version of the white transition light that we talked about in the first documentary, doesn't it? Funny how this transition light only shows up in instances of non-reality. Next is a very faint image of a planet, which we can only assume is Earth, which doesn't really mean anything. So anyway, the white transition light, this time in full, comes next, white glowingness and all. Again, weird how we only see it at parts of the game that aren't supposed to be reality. So next we see another clip of a Reaper walking through the Citadel, which is very strange to begin with. Anyway, he starts shooting out lasers everywhere just like the last one, but this time we see a man standing and watching, and to me, the man looks a lot like Anderson. The weird thing is, the man doesn't move or react at all. This next clip is awesome. We see a guy hunched over, to me it looks like Shepard, standing in front of a pillar of light. I believe there are Reapers behind that light, not only creating the light, but shooting their lasers through it. But I said it's awesome because it reminds me a lot of the last scene of Mass Effect 3, where Shepard is trudging toward the beam after he wakes up. The stance of the man is the same, and the pillar of light is very similar. Then we see more Reapers. Then, this next part is of our crew members standing in a group together on a place that looks a lot like Ilium, or the Citadel. Then a Reaper who looks like Harbinger lands in front of them. Then the video finishes up with an image of Kelly Chambers turning around to the camera and being liquefied like what happened on the Collector base at the end of Mass Effect 2 if you didn't get there fast enough. What does this all mean? It means Shepard is having a hallucination of the future because he failed. But where are these images coming from? If Shepard fails the mission, he should have just failed the mission, plain and simple, like he has thousands of times before in the series. There was absolutely no need for this 10-second clip that obviously took a lot of work to produce to be there, and it's there. So I believe that it is because now that Shepard has been exposed to the Reaper artifact over the 2 days, that these are the first effects of indoctrination taking place. That is, the ability to receive hallucinations from the Reapers. This is basically like Harbinger speaking to Shepard, mocking him right before he dies, saying, "You failed." That might sound a bit far-fetched, but it makes sense because Harbinger has been like the overseer of the entire Arrival project, and so it makes sense for him to be watching Shepard's every move while he's there. It also makes sense that while Shepard was knocked out for 2 days, they may have established a direct link between Shepard and Harbinger. I want to pop this with a confirmed piece of supporting evidence, but I have to give it a plausible stamp because it does not ever explicitly reference indoctrination itself, but rather insinuates toward it. Alright, so for this next topic, I only need to say one word to send supporters and critics of the theory into a heated debate. Clencory. For those of you who don't know, the Clencory theory is something that isn't evidence, but is instead something that actually works against the theory. It's honestly one of the only things the critics have been able to come up with that actually is worth talking about. This one goes beyond the traditional counter-argument of bad writing, lazy developers, So, here's the theory. There is a planet in Mass Effect 1 named Clencory, and the planet's description talks about a rich and eccentric Volus named Kumin Shoal who claims that he had a vision of a higher being that told him to go to Clencory and looked for the lost crypts of beings of light. The Codex states that these beings of light were created at the time of the universe's birth, and that they are here to protect all organics from the synthetic machine devils, as the Codex states. The reason so many critics cling to this theory is because they are saying that the Star Child is one of these beings of light, and is a legitimate entity designed to protect all organics such as he states he is. They claim that because Clencory exists, that it is automatically debunking the whole IT theory, since this would mean that the Star Child is simply a real entity and that he is really here to protect us. It is important to note that we can look at this planet once again in Mass Effect 3, by the way. Can I just make a quick interjection before I answer those questions though? Do you know what's funny? The critics claim that the writers of BioWare are bad writers when they talk about debunking parts of the theory. But would a bad writer leave hints this big at the beginning of the series? Which is it, critics? Is the Clencory being true, or are the BioWare staff bad writers? You cannot have both. Anyway, our friend Jessica Marizin has responded to a tweet that at first glance appears to be supporting this idea. A fan writes, "By the way, can we assume that the Catalyst is a VI/AI, meaning virtual intelligence/artificial intelligence, meaning that he's a synthetic like many of the critics believe?" To which Marizin replies, "It's presumed to be a being of light. See Mass Effect 1 lore." Critics lost their minds with this tweet and had a field day with it. Game over, right? Wrong. Time to surgically destroy this theory. Let's do this one backwards. The Jessica Marizin tweet doesn't actually support the theory. She uses the word presumed. Presumed does not mean confirmed. Presumed does not mean this is what it is. Presumed usually goes along with being wrong oftentimes, and it is likely that she means we are led to believe, or even that Shepard is led to believe, that the Catalyst is a being of light. That doesn't make it necessarily true, which is why she put that word in there. Marizin is just telling us that this is what we were led to believe. There is an extremely large distinction between presumed and this is true. Let me rephrase my point here. If Miss Marizin were trying to confirm that yes, it is indeed a being of light, then she would have simply said it is a being of light. But the use of the phrase presumed to be is explicitly telling us that it is not certainly a being of light. If anything, this tweet actually disproves the Clencory theory because Marizin is basically telling us that either we the players or that Shepard are meant to believe that it is a being of light, when it is in fact not. But above all else, she is quite literally saying, nobody knows, meaning that BioWare has leg room to change the ending if they need to, and they need to. Now, I'm not done with this just yet. I'm going to put such a twist on this theory that your heads are going to spin harder than an M. Night Shyamalan film. That's right, I'm going full-on Tony Hawk 180 flip here. If the indoctrination theory is true, then the Clencory thing fits in perfectly. Why? For one, Shepard has already seen the entry on Clencory. He knows the story of the beings of light. The Reapers know about the beings of light too because Shepard knows about it. And because the Reapers just know everything, they're the Reapers. They know everything about every planet, everywhere. That's just how the Reapers are. Do you see where I'm going with this? Let me explain this in as simple of a way as I possibly can. Do you remember the whole thing I talked about during the first documentary? What I said about the fact that Destroy is Renegade Red, while Control is Paragon Blue? It's because it's all one big mind game. The Reapers switch those two options around to play on Shepard's morals. It's the same concept here. The Reapers know that Shepard has heard about these beings of light. What is the opposite of oily shadows that we saw on the lower level with the Elusive Man? Gee, I don't know, how about beings of light? The Reapers tried to make it known to Shepard during the dream that the Elusive Man was indoctrinated in evil. They've presented oily shadows through him throughout the entire game as well. Now they're trying to create a separation from that in Shepard's mind, trying to get him associate shadows with the Reapers and light with good, and separate Shepard's idea of the Reapers from the Star Child in an effort to gain his trust. And they do this by not only taking the form of the child Shepard wanted to save, but also by taking the form of a being of light that is purportedly supposed to be a bastion of organics against the evil synthetics. They are presenting themselves in a way that will make Shepard trust them. It's very deceitful, and it matches up with the core principles of indoctrination exactly. This stuff is supposed to fly right over our heads and go right under our noses, and that is just yet another piece of evidence that is so good it actually looks like it hurts the theory. Isn't it funny how that works out? So, critics, how does it feel to have been supporting a piece of evidence that actually supports the theory you're trying to disprove? I'm just curious. To recap, no, the Glencory thing does not mean that the ending we got is legitimate. In fact, it only supports the theory because it's just one more example of how the Reapers are trying to manipulate Shepard into believing them. Oh, and I'm not done yet, I've still got one more thing to talk about before I make the call on this one. Do you remember in the first documentary when I said that the Star Child is obviously a Reaper manifestation because he says, "I know you've thought about destroying us," rather than the Reapers? Well, looks like that only helps us out even more here, because when I said that in the first documentary, a bunch of you wrote in the comments stuff like, maybe he's saying us because he's a synthetic too. But if the Star Child we see is truly a being of light, according to the lore, then he wouldn't have said us. Nowhere in the entire lore does it suggest that the beings of light are synthetics. It actually supports the exact opposite. The beings of light believe that all synthetics are evil, so why the hell would they think that their own race is evil? It makes zero sense. So there goes that counter-argument of the critics, and there's your answer, commenters. He can't be a synthetic if he's a real being of light, which means he should have never said us, yet he did. And by the way, he also pluralizes himself in reference to the Reapers in multiple other parts of the conversation too. Furthermore, if he was a real being of light, he would have immediately been on board with Shepard destroying the Reapers. He would have handed Shepard the pistol and said, "Hose these motherfuckers," after taking off a pair of sunglasses. Why? Because the beings of light are supposed to be the protectors of organics, and view the synthetics as evil machines. No true being of light would ever suggest trying to combine the DNA of pure organics with the devil machine synthetics. That completely goes against the lore and the logic of the series in reference to these beings of light. So let's recap once again just so everybody has it clear. The Glencory criticism isn't actually a criticism, but it's actually a very strong supporting piece of evidence in favor of the indoctrination theory rather than against it, because of the fact that if he was really a being of light, he would have immediately wanted Shepard to kill the Reapers, and it would have never suggested any of the other two options. I hereby knight thee piece of evidence, Sir confirmed the land of confirmed land. Damn, I'm good. So what's next after turning an anti-IT theory around and making it actually prove the theory even more? Well, it's only natural that now I take something IT supporters have believed in and debunk that. Come on guys, we have to give the critics something, right? But no, seriously, this is something that has irked me since I first heard about it, and I want to set the record straight. What is it? Well, it's not a what, but a who, and that who is Major Coates. A more recent theory is that Major Coates is actually indoctrinated, and has been trying to lure Shepard to the Reapers. They say that back when Major Coates was defending Earth alone in Big Bend for days, that was enough time for him to succumb to indoctrination. The theory states that he is being used as an inside man to keep tabs on the war efforts. Makes sense at face value. The theory says that when Shepard is talking to Coates, that Coates mysteriously disappears like the kid does on the first Earth level. The theory then states that throughout the entire level, Coates has been pessimistic and has been trying to stunt the progression of the effort rather than help it. The kicker is finally that Major Coates never descends down the hill with the rest of the assault team, and then when he finally sees Shepard is still alive after being hit, he calls off the attack over the radio so that no one can go in and support Shepard, ultimately finishing his dirty work and letting the Reapers take over. Sounds great on paper, like I said, but upon review, it's all wrong. First of all, when Coates is done talking to Shepard at the base in the beginning, he doesn't mysteriously disappear like the kid does in the air ducts. Coates is shown quite obviously walking away from the conversation, and he even tells Shepard where he's going, why he's leaving. That's not very mysterious. Sure, Coates is nowhere to be found after the conversation is over, but that's only a game mechanic. We've seen this happen 100 times throughout the series, people vanishing off of the game map as soon as your conversation with them is over. Why? Because it's just pointless and tedious to map out a path for the NPC to follow every time they exit the scene. So yeah. Anyway, as for the whole pessimism thing, I wouldn't say Coates is pessimistic at all. If anything, he's been trying to support Shepard over the radio this entire time, ordering the troops around and doing the best plan of action to the best of his ability for every given situation. I never got a single hint of pessimism or hesitation from him, and part of my degree is in reading people, so I should know. Coates is very simply just the British badass who rivals the caliber of Captain Price from the Modern Warfare series. That's immediately who I thought of when I first saw Coates. He's nothing more than a battle-hardened soldier looking to fight the Reapers in his own way. Furthermore, it makes perfect sense for a commanding officer to stay behind and coordinate the attack while everybody is rushing the beam. If Anderson and Coates had rushed the beam at the same time, nobody would be left to organize the remainder of the fight if something goes awry. Remember how there's still half of the Hammer crew that hasn't reported in yet? They could still be out there, so someone needs to stay and try to find them if the assault fails, as it does. Now, the whole Coates calling the retreat thing actually makes sense. First of all, we hear this after Shepard is hit with the beam, which means it may not have even been happening in reality. Shepard may have just been imagining that Coates is calling the retreat, or maybe he's hearing it for real and it's just going into his dream. In that case, it still makes sense, because he calls off the retreat before Shepard stands up. It's possible Coates saw the decimated battlefield, called off the fight, turned around right when Shepard gets up, and goes back to organize another assault. He doesn't have time to stand and watch a bunch of dead bodies or mourn the fallen. He's got a war to win. To me, the entire theory of Coates being indoctrinated is busted more than the time you found your cat clawing the furniture. It holds no merit, and not a single shred of the theory actually holds anything that could support the indoctrination theory. Every single piece is easily explained away or debunked. Sorry guys, it's just busted because this is the kind of thing that started the witch hunts. Now I'd like to move on and revisit the section of the game after Shepard is hit with Harbinger's laser. Yep, we're just getting started. First up is the continuity problems of Shepard's teammates. In the first documentary towards the end, I talked about how it made no sense that the teammates end up on the Normandy, but I left something important out. They're dead already. That is, if you have a low EMS rating. Like, literally, they're dead. Most of us probably had a high EMS rating, so we didn't see it, but those of us who didn't were met with 2 dead teammates on the floor after being hit by Harbinger. Whichever 2 teammates you choose are shown dead instead of the 2 soldiers. And yet, at the end of the game, they get out of the Normandy all fine and dandy? I call bullshit. This is further reinforced by the fact that one of BioWare's deleted scenes that was included in the Final Hours iPhone app by BioWare, now also available on the PC, shows Garrus and Liara dying during that scene. Why was this cut from the game? Probably because having a scene that dramatic being present in the game, and then seeing those same teammates perfectly fine 10 minutes later at the end, would be way more obvious than doing what they actually did. I mean, when you have a cutscene that says, "They died," and then another cutscene that says, "Lol, no they didn't," then it's pretty much single-handedly proving the fact that the ending sequence we see at the very end of the game is not reality. So they went the more subtle route and just showed the dead character models. Less people would notice this way. To me, this is clear-cut confirmed, and I honestly feel that this is a bigger piece of evidence than people realize, because there's absolutely no way that they just overlooked the resurrection of 2 dead allies. That's just too big of a plot point to simply cast off as lazy writing. That excuse just doesn't fly here. They were shown alive at the end for a reason. Right, so moving on. This next one is something I deliberately left out, but a lot of people have posted about it, so I figured I'd appease them and talk about it now. And that is the similarities between where Shepard gets hit and the decision chamber. There are a few similarities, but the first important one is the overturned Mako tank on the left side of Shepard that looks almost exactly like the round canisters we see on the left hand side in front of the control choice. They look almost exactly like the wheels on the Mako tank, save for the fact that it's missing a wheel. Second, the beam itself is quite literally the same exact beam, and the walkway that Shepard takes to get to the beam in the decision chamber looks a lot like the walkway Shepard takes when going up to the beam of the Citadel. Lastly, the overall ambience of the two areas are extremely similar. Now, the general idea is that because Shepard is barely conscious back in reality, that he is using imagery from around him to construct the image of the Crucible. It makes sense in theory, but because there aren't any significant similarities other than the beam, which makes sense for a time-pressed company to reuse, I'm gonna have to agree with the critics' argument of grasping at straws here for once, and give this one a plausible stamp. There's just not enough to make it appear significant, which is why I initially left it out. But again, in theory, it does make some degree of sense. Next, I'd like to revisit something from the first documentary, something I was wrong about. That's right, I said it, I was wrong about something. And besides, it takes a real man to admit his mistakes anyway, right? But seriously, this one is something that has actually surfaced after the first documentary, so I'm in the clear. Remember the magic trees and bushes appearing that I thought I had debunked in the first documentary? In case your memory is foggy, the theory is that there are black, mystical-looking trees and bushes that are present after Shepard gets hit with the Harbinger laser that were also in the dream sequences. In the first documentary, I showed how there were also trees and bushes before Shepard gets hit with the beam, and therefore discounted the theory as people just being confused. But guess what? There are some trees that appear only after Shepard gets hit with the laser. There is even a crashed helicopter that actually disappears completely. Check these excellent screenshots out, presented to me by my friend on the CleverNoob forums, Excelsispio. Look, let's think about this critically for a second. The critics are going to want to say, it's an oversight, it's a design flaw, or something along those lines. But think about it from an arbitrary point of view for just 1 minute. Why would a time-pressed company actually redo subtle details of a map unnecessarily, unless it is necessary to convey the fact that it's a dream? The mappers took the time to remove an entire helicopter crash, to add in a tree nearby, and to add in bushes nearby as well. Why didn't they just add it into the first map when Shepard was running down the hill, and then simply use that part of the map for the waking up scene with a different camera angle? That's what I had assumed they would have done. Why was there the need to redo the entire map for one small scene? And if they did, why bother putting in various ambience effects and actually removing parts of another? It's intriguing, but because the answers are just a hair shy of being confirmed, I'll have to give this one from busted to plausible. So now that we're back aboard the Citadel once again, it's time to play with shadows. No, not your shadows, Anderson's and the Elusive Man's. Strangely enough, during the conversation with the Elusive Man and Anderson, the duo shadows do some very odd things. It appears as though their shadows are forever facing away from one another, representing the opposition between the two characters. They do not reflect the positioning of the room's lighting. There are multiple light fixtures all around the ceiling of the room, which should be creating an X effect over the shadow, much like you'd see at a baseball or football stadium at night. Even when the Elusive Man walks around, despite standing right where Anderson was a moment ago, his shadow remains stationary and in a fixed position, even literally crossing with Anderson's at one point. Someone went very, very in-depth and actually made a whole chart about this showing the different positions at the key points during the conversation, but the short version is this. The shadows are weird and don't act the way they should. Generally speaking, throughout the entire Mass Effect series, the shadow placements, at least from what I have noticed, have been accurately portrayed according to the light sourcing. But this is still an extremely subjective piece of evidence, so guess what? Plausible it is. The next thing I want to talk about is something I've proudly noticed all on my own. Hooray! But seriously, this one is pretty interesting if I do say so myself, and I haven't really heard a good explanation for it. During the conversation with the Elusive Man and Anderson, Captain Anderson makes a few remarks like, you're being indoctrinated, and the more important one, they're controlling you. I quickly made an annotation to the first documentary when I noticed this after it had already been produced, but I actually want to discuss it now that I have the opportunity. When Anderson says "you" in that last sentence, his eyes shift toward what looks like the elusive man. However, he actually looks directly at the camera's point of view, which is currently Shepard's point of view. If he had been looking at the elusive man, then his eyes would have met with the elusive man's, or at the very least, they would have actually looked at him. But Anderson's line of sight is shooting over the elusive man's left shoulder directly at the camera, which again is currently Shepard. How do we know that the camera is currently Shepard? Because in the scene, literally right before Anderson says this, we can see Shepard standing very closely behind the elusive man, positioned over the elusive man's left shoulder, which is exactly where Anderson looks during this scene. The critic in me wants to give this a plausible, but as the person who sat there frame by frame and watched Anderson's eyes during the scene, never making contact with the elusive man's, and as the person who knows all the other evidence about the elusive man and Anderson being representations of Shepard's fighting consciousness, it seems very evident to me that this should be a confirmed piece of evidence. Albeit, it's about as close on the borderline between plausible and confirmed as it gets, but I think ultimately when we take into consideration all the other pieces of evidence about this scene, that we should honor this piece of evidence with a weak confirmed. Want to know something even better about this? I've spoken with somebody on the BioWare forums named TSA who has claimed to have found another piece of evidence that relates very, very closely with the one I described. And like the whole dream foliage evidence from the first documentary, this too is directly from the game's files itself. According to what TSA says, he looked through the dialogue files of that section of the game, and what he found is startling. In every single piece of dialogue after Shepard is hit with the beam, every single sentence is directed at him. The code shows that Shepard is being the one listed as the listener, rather than the elusive man and Anderson when they're talking back and forth to each other like we are led to believe. In the code, the characters are listed as variable 1, variable 2, or variable 3. Shepard is variable 2, because variable 2 is shown as sometimes being the speaker and the dialogue is the stuff that Shepard says during that scene. Every single time either Anderson or the elusive man speaks during this scene, variable 2 is shown as the listener, including the part where Anderson says, "They're controlling you and you're being indoctrinated." Compelling, isn't it? Now, like I said, I've talked with TSA about this and he provided me with screenshots of the text files that contained these dialogue lines. However, he could not remember where they were among the chaos of files within the game. Therefore, because I was not able to 100% confirm the existence of these files myself, I cannot 100% say that this is confirmed. So this one is getting a plausible just because of that last painful fact. But if you want my personal opinion, I seriously doubt the fact that TSA just made this up. It's an intricate system that he couldn't have just come up with, and it proves very little on its own. If someone was going to fabricate a piece of evidence this complex, they would have chosen something to be more significant. From what I can tell, TSA is a good guy, so I trust him with this. But because I wasn't able to see the file myself, I simply cannot call this a confirmed. So sorry guys, the critic in me is forcing a plausible here, despite the fact that this correlates very, very strongly with the whole eye positioning thing that we know is true. So here's something that went way over my head while I was playing and making the first documentary. Where'd the elusive man come from? As we learned from the first documentary, there was only one way into that part of the Citadel, the whole point A to point B warp that Shepard just went through, remember? Leading him to an obviously predetermined place. Just like how it didn't make any sense for Anderson to have been ahead of Shepard along his path when he claimed that he followed Shepard in, it also makes absolutely zero sense for the elusive man to have appeared out of nowhere. We learned while we were on the Cerberus base that the elusive man planned to go cry wolf to the Reapers and was on his way there. So if the ending we see is real, then the elusive man was already there way, way, way ahead of us. I'm talking hours or maybe even days. So then, if that's true, then seriously, where did he come from? Look around everywhere on the pathway from where Shepard enters the Citadel to the control room area, and there are no other ways into that area, and we didn't see the elusive man at all before he mysteriously appeared. Do the math in your head. We all know there isn't any other way to the part of the Citadel based on observation other than where Shepard came from. If we know that the elusive man was there way before anybody else, and if we didn't see the elusive man on our walk to the control room, also look around the control room, he's not there, it's not like he was hiding behind one of the control room wall panelings or something, then it makes no sense for him to have just popped out of thin air. Unless this is a dream, of course. I hear you, critics, it's just lazy writing. But no, that doesn't make sense. It's one of the most important parts of this series, one of the most important scenes of the entire 5-year series. You don't just start making characters go poof out of nowhere at a time like this. I've given these critics enough leeway so far. It's time for the supporters to get a break for once. This one is getting a confirmed like it or not because it simply makes no sense. Here's another fun one for you guys and gals to ponder. Why does Shepard's radio still work? I mean, did he not just get blown to hell in high water by that Reaper laser? I don't care how advanced the technology is, a radio is still a radio. It should have been overloaded by the surge of heat and energy coming off of that laser beam, so the radio should not be working at all right now. Yet both his and Anderson's are working without so much of a hitch of static, and he can still talk to Admiral Hackett perfectly fine too. Furthermore, if Shepard's radio was fine, then for the love of all that is holy, why didn't he call for reinforcements as soon as he got up the beam? He saw Harbinger leaving, he heard the fallback orders from outside, and he knows the importance of this mission. Shepard is not stupid enough or self-centered enough to try and go it alone, no matter how epic the situation is. Shepard is a mature adult and knows when he needs help, and that was the time of all times to ask for it, but he didn't do so much as even try to radio for help. He could have done it during that 2 to 3 minute walk to the control panel, but he didn't. Why? Don't tell me it's because he's too caught up in the moment. The whole point of that moment was the high intensity of the mission. The mission was his top priority at the time. It's not like he was thinking about what he was going to be having for dinner that night and totally forgot to radio for help. No, the mission was number one on his mind, and he totally ignored the fact that the mission is probably going to fail if he croaks, which it looked like he was totally going to do judging by his appearance. So why not ask for help? He could have done it while he was walking. Like I've said countless times before, it doesn't add up, and neither does the fact that his radio still works in the first place. Confirmed, because if this is just another example of lazy writing, like the critics are probably chanting, then holy handbaskets, Batman, did BioWare fail hard with this writing. And I refuse to believe that the same company that crafted this awesome storyline could fail us this badly in the end. It's not grasping at straws, it's not being in denial, it's faith in the same company that has never made a mistake like this before in its entire career of development. At least not with the Mass Effect series. Now it's time to proceed back into the decision chamber once again for one more bout of speculation and crazed conspiracy talk. But anyway, I have a question. Is this room exposed to the vacuum of space right now? Okay, it was a rhetorical question, but anyway, I totally just thought that there was a big piece of glass around the edges of the area or something, but if you watch the cutscene when the Crucible docks the Citadel, it never makes a seal, and the area that it connects to totally looks like the area we're standing on right now. We see the beam and everything, meaning that those openings on the side, those are completely open areas that Shepard could waltz on out of if he wanted to. This raises just so many questions. The first obviously being, how is Shepard alive? The second, why isn't Shepard flying? The third, seriously, why is Shepard alive? All of these questions and anything else you can think of that is totally off about this area can be answered with this. It's a dream. Duh. And while that may sound like my cop-out today, I can't tell you how many times I've dreamt that I was off riding a unicorn across the vast waves of space. Okay, maybe I've said too much, so I digress, but the point still stands. Now, I've read somewhere among the piles and piles of forum posts on the BioWare forums that this has already been addressed by Casey Hudson and answered with, "Lols, there's a magic's force fields." But that's so weak, guys, come on. A force field is keeping Shepard alive? That's so stupid. We've never seen that before in the entire series. Why now? And what is producing those force fields? That's just dumb. Dumb, I tell you. Furthermore, like the other piece of evidence with the dialogue being directed at Shepard, I was not able to confirm this statement, So I don't even know for a 100% fact whether or not Casey Hudson or anybody on the BioWare staff team ever made the statement in the first place. I never actually read any news article or read any Twitter posts or watched any press conference with anybody answering this question, so I don't know if it's true or not. I'll give the person who said it the benefit of the doubt though, and drop this back from a confirmed to a plausible instead just in case, because if that little tidbit of force field is true, then I guess it pretty much answers our questions, however pathetically weak it may be. Seriously, I could sell sand to an Arabian man and come up with a stronger sense of reasoning than that. This next one is a question that many of you had after the first documentary. I received many comments and messages asking me, Julian, if the indoctrination theory is true, then why is destroy the only option available for people who have a low EMS rating? Why would the Reapers make Shepard beating indoctrination inevitable? That's a good question, but I've got an even better answer. Actually, I even have more than one answer for you. The first is this. Okay, so let's assume the indoctrination theory is true and was totally planned all along, which I totally don't think it was, but I digress. This means that we still have to see the real ending, meaning that Shepard still has to progress further yet. He can't do that if he's dead, and 2 of the 3 endings kill him off completely, or at the very least makes his mind like putty in the Reaper's hands. With that in mind, wouldn't it be like a giant middle finger to the newcomers of the series to force them to replay the entire game over again just so they can see the real ending? Yes, it would. So from a practical, developmental point of view, it makes perfect sense to only offer the destroy ending to the newcomers to the series, or to people who just didn't do the whole EMS thing. Now, another alternative explanation is this. The longer Shepard spends preparing the troops and getting everyone to work together, the more stressed out he becomes, and the more fragile his mind becomes, leaving him as a more vulnerable target for the influence of the Reapers. Makes sense, doesn't it? If you're trying to rally together millions of people who naturally don't like each other, and are trying to scrap together whatever you can possibly find to add to your arsenal, that's eventually going to drain you. It's going to take the fuel out of the fire of, let's kill the Reapers, distract you, and ultimately turn that intrinsic mission of killing the Reapers into a more wishy-washy mission of, hey, I just met you and this is crazy, but kill the Reapers, just trust me maybe. All jokes aside though, think about it, and I'm sorry if that was painful to listen to. The more time Shepard spends rallying people together and doing grunt work, the less he's thinking about actually fighting the Reapers, the weaker his resolve becomes, and the more susceptible to the Reapers he becomes. Therefore, it makes perfect sense that when we have a higher EMS rating, it means we also have a more tired and drained Shepard with a weaker state of mind. So realistically, both of these answers can coexist and both make sense at the exact same time. But I'm still not done yet. Did you know that if you've played Mass Effect 2, and at the very end of the game, if you chose to save the Reaper technology, which is something the Elusive Man wanted you to do, and if you have a low EMS rating in Mass Effect 3, then your only option is control. This is a fact. Weird, right? And it totally plays in with the 2 answers I just gave you a few minutes ago, as well as the indoctrination theory as a whole, if you think about it. So, I think this one is pretty clear-cut confirmed. No other way around it. This next one I don't even really want to talk about, but I'm doing it for you fans. There's a piece of evidence out there that revolves around the concept of Shepard's gun changing during the final scenes of the game. Obviously, when we get up for being hit by Harbinger, we have a pistol regardless of whatever weapon we were carrying previously. Yes, all our other weapons mysteriously disappeared, and we somehow ended up with a gun that is the same exact gun Captain Anderson had just a few moments ago at the top of the hill. Weird, right? Well, it gets even weirder when Shepard chooses the destroy ending, because after the initial explosion of the canister, Shepard's gun actually changes models, just like that, poof, out of thin air. A few people have gone really in depth with this and gone as far as figuring out just what each of these guns are, and have also even noticed that Shepard is reloading them differently from what they should be reloaded as, but I feel that this information is irrelevant to this piece of evidence, so I'm leaving it out. All you need to know is this. Shepard gets a mysterious pistol that looks like the one Anderson had earlier. The pistol the Elusive Man gets off the holster of Anderson to kill himself with isn't the same gun that Anderson had earlier, which is now in Shepard's possession, and that Shepard's gun changes models completely out of nowhere during the destroy option sequence. It's weird, sure, but does it actually prove anything? Maybe, maybe not. It's too hard to tell because these are the type of things that I would expect a writing staff or a development team or a Q&A team to miss. These are the simple mistakes and types of design oversights that I think are acceptable, okay, and happen on a regular basis. But since millions of fans don't go picking apart every moment of every single ending of every single game on a regular basis, we probably just don't notice them usually. Therefore, I'm actually half siding with the critics for once on this and slapping this with the plausible, because again, this is the type of design oversight that makes perfect sense to me. It's just too subtle of a thing to actually serve as a clue, especially for a time-pressed company. But because of just how strange it is, I'm still going to leave this as a very, 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 very weak piece of plausible evidence, and a big part of me even wants to give it a false label. Now, moving on to yet another piece of evidence that has been presented to me by the fans since the first documentary, the tree reflections. Just when you thought I wasn't going to talk about them, here it is. This piece of evidence states that when we are present in the decision chamber at the end of the game, there are actually quite literally reflections of trees in the metal throughout the map, of trees that obviously aren't in the map. Now, this one is tricky because console users can't see the reflections, only PC users can. And only PC users can see the reflections if they use a program called Flycam. This lets them roam the map at any angle or altitude that they want, so that they are able to see things we can't in the map. And the tree reflections are 100% definitely, undeniably there, which is weird because there totally aren't any trees in the level. Why would the level designers go out of their way to incorporate an extra effect like the tree reflections in the sheet metal if there are no trees to cause those reflections? Could it be because this is an incredibly subtle hint that this is all just a figment of Shepard's imagination, with the trees being yet another reference to the nightmares Shepard has been having throughout the game that we've already deduced were indoctrination attempts? Or can this be explained another way? For example, what if the original map was supposed to have trees and resemble something along the lines of the final planet, rather than the way we saw it in-game? And then, what if an evil production company such as EA pressures the developing company to finish the game, causing them to remove said trees in order to make sense with the newly crafted ending to the story? Wouldn't it make sense for them to have completely forgotten to remove these tree reflections? Maybe instead of simply adding in an easy-to-do reflection effect on the ground for the tree models to cast, if they instead actually designed the pieces of sheet metal to have a tree reflection overlay over them, which they later forgot to remove? It seems like a perfectly plausible situation to me, which is why this piece of evidence is getting a plausible sticker. It is definitely interesting, and I'm going out on a pretty big limb here to assume that they just forgot to remove the reflections, when realistically, the reflections should have automatically been removed once the trees themselves were removed. But because I like to consider every single possibility, this is going to remain a plausible. This last piece of evidence for the decision chamber room, and for the Citadel scene as a whole, comes back to the 1M1 theory that we spoke of earlier. Well, it does and it doesn't. Some people have been saying that we shouldn't even see the 1M1 stamp there to begin with, since the Citadel was not made by humans. Therefore, why is Shepard seeing human letters and numbers there at all? If there are any structural pieces of writing like that, shouldn't they be in a language we've never even seen before? It totally doesn't make sense for Shepard to be seeing human letters and numbers when the Citadel was made by the Reapers countless years before the humans ever even existed. However, like I said earlier, this also is the type of design oversight that I would expect any development company to make, and this is also the type of thing we would only notice if we were dissecting every single section of a game like we've been doing to Mass Effect 3. The same mistake is probably made in countless games as well, and in addition, it's kind of the same thing as why can Shepard understand all the other alien races, and there's quite a few other explanations that you could come up with on your own if you think hard enough. But because this is all speculation, and I can't just outright deny this piece of evidence, and I obviously can't confirm it, I'm going to reluctantly give it another plausible. Now it's time to move on to the group of events that take place after Shepard makes the decision. You wouldn't think there's a lot to discuss here, but there actually is. The first of which is the problems with where the Mass Effect Relay Blast originates from. So, as you may recall, a major point about the ending is that the relays explode, starting from the Sol system since that's where everything's going down, and then it branches out to all of the other Mass Effect relays, causing them to explode as well. This happens in all 3 endings and is completely unavoidable. But hang on a second. During the cinematic at the end, the blast doesn't originate from the local cluster, aka the Sol system. It originates from the Viper Nebula, aka the Bahak system. These 2 clusters are pretty far apart as shown by this map of the Milky Way galaxy. So, when we compare this image to the video of the explosions, the blast very clearly originates from the Viper Nebula. Weird, isn't it? But hang on, because it gets even weirder. The Viper Nebula just so happens to be the exact place in the Arrival DLC where Shepard blew up the Mass Effect relay and wiped out the Batarian colony there. So not only does the explosion at the end of Mass Effect 3 actually appear to begin in the Viper Nebula when it should be coming from the local cluster, but there also shouldn't even be a Mass Effect relay to even be affected by the explosion at all in the Viper Nebula, since it got blown up during the Arrival DLC. So you tell me, is that just a weird coincidence that was overlooked by the developers, or is it just too coincidental to ignore? For me, I feel that both the developers and the CGI animation teams at BioWare couldn't have both missed this huge mistake. I mean, it's a CGI animation after all. Those take a while to create, and a CGI animator pays very close attention to what they're doing while they make the animation. Don't you think they would have not only realized that where they were starting the blast chain was in the wrong spot, but also that they started it in a place that shouldn't even have a Mass Effect relay anymore to begin with? So then what's the answer? Well, I don't have one, but I can offer an educated guess. Since this is all just a dream, as explained by the whole Dream Foliage file name from the first documentary, in addition to the other compelling evidence we've seen thus far, it would make sense for Shepard's subconscious mind to be reflecting his memories of the Arrival DLC into this scene, because the only other time he's ever seen a Mass Effect relay explode was in the Viper Nebula, which as we all know caused him a significant amount of guilt. So Shepard is imagining it once again as the place of origin for this galaxy-wide relay explosion. And if you think about it, it's very possible that Shepard's subconscious mind is trying to relive the events of the Arrival DLC and actually make him feel that he made the right decision and that everyone in the Viper Nebula is okay, even though we know that's not the case. It makes sense to me, especially because the whole critic fallback argument of lazy developing doesn't seem to work in this case, since not just one, but 2, or even more, completely different teams over at BioWare would have had to miss this one completely, and one of those teams would have spent weeks or even months developing this CGI scene and going over every little detail. They got the placement and positioning of every other cluster in the nebula correct, so how could they possibly screw up the positioning of the most important cluster of all, in addition to including the cluster that doesn't even have a relay anymore? I don't buy that answer, critics, so this one is getting it confirmed. This next one is a fan favorite. Why is Joker running away from the scene? He never knew what was happening with Shepard aboard the Citadel. He didn't know the decision he was going to make or the repercussions of that decision. It's not like he saw the blast starting and had enough time to turn the Normandy around and start running in the opposite direction. That just didn't happen. And furthermore, how did the squad mates get aboard the Normandy in the first place? They also did not know what was going on, and Joker didn't know what was happening, so there's no reason for him to have enough time to start running away from the blast to begin with. And even if he did somehow know, then why did he run away from the green and blue options, which weren't supposed to hurt the Normandy at all, yet we still see it getting pretty screwed up by that blast, regardless of the color choice? I can't think of a reasonable explanation for this, to be honest, unless, of course, Shepard's half-broken mind is the one thinking that this is really happening, and that's why it makes sense upon watching it at face value. We don't realize we've been dreaming until after we're out of the dream anyway, right? The same concept applies here. Confirmed. The next piece of evidence also has to do with the Joker. Specifically, how was the Joker not a pile of mush sitting in a bucket aboard the Normandy after that crash? First of all, the shockwave that we saw, as we've spoken about before, was quite strong. Not only that, but the physical crash of the Normandy hitting the ground of the planet should have been enough to break every bone in Joker's brittle body. For those of you who don't know, or just forgot, Joker has a pretty serious disease where his bones are about as weak as a piece of balsa wood. There are multiple cutscenes where Shepard simply pats Joker on the back and nearly breaks his shoulder off. So you mean to tell me that the Normandy crashing and the shockwave of the initial blast didn't turn Joker's bones into a pack of jello. Yet, he gets out of the Normandy completely fine, unscathed, which only adds to the idea that Shepard was dreaming all of this at the end. It ties into the whole theme of hope that we spoke about earlier, where Shepard at the end of the game wants to believe that he made the right decision, regardless of whatever choice he actually makes. I feel like this is another confirmed piece of evidence because Joker just should not have walked out of that ship without being mopped up into a bucket first. Now, this one is pretty much the motherlode of all questions and evidence all wrapped up into one big package. Here's a nice pretty list of all the things Shepard should have died from, but still somehow survives. If you get the breathing scene when picking the destroy option, that is. The purpose of this is to make you realize there's absolutely no way Shepard could have survived through all of this unless it was all a dream and he never really left London to begin with. So, here we are. First and foremost, we have to understand that Shepard has some pretty serious injuries as it is. He just got hit point blank with a laser that is powerful enough to rend a helicopter built with steel right in half and blow buildings up just on impact. So why isn't Shepard dead from being hit head-on from it unless Harbinger was deliberately trying to just maim him rather than kill him and held back a bit? Secondly, he's lost a lot of blood judging by the pool of blood that he wakes up in. Then he gets shot by Marauder shields and is still walking. Then he mysteriously receives the same bullet hole wound as Anderson, and yet he still has enough stamina left to walk, talk, stand upright, and run. I call bullshit already, and that's just the first bullet point of this barrage of things that Shepard should have died from. The next point is the initial explosion of the tube Shepard shoots at when choosing the destroy option. That was a pretty big explosion, and Shepard was standing right next to it. Couple that with the injury Shepard already has, and he should not survive that blast. It took up a third of the room he was in, and that was a pretty large room. He didn't even try to run away, and we saw the cutscene of an unprotected Shepard being completely engulfed in those flames. Shepard should be dead. Then, we have the shockwave of the red laser beam that gets sent out all across the galaxy, with Shepard being at ground zero of the blast. You might not think that this is a dangerous blast, but it is, because we see the red laser shockwave being enough to push around space debris and knock around the Reapers in space, so why wouldn't that same shockwave be enough to kill Shepard just on impact? Have you ever felt the booming shockwave when you've heard thunder outside, or been in an earthquake? It's a lot like that, only about 1,000 times stronger, judging by the force and range of the blast. Being at ground zero of that would certainly produce enough of a shockwave to insta-kill anybody standing right next to it. Next is the most talked about one, the actual explosion of the Citadel's core. Shepard is literally standing at the very center of the Citadel, as shown by the cutscenes. It's not like he's out on one of the wings where he could be safe. No, Shepard is dead center in the middle of the ring of the Citadel, which completely goes up in a blaze of glory. Everything should have been vaporized by that blast, and at the very least, any living organism should have been killed by that blast. For Shepard to have survived that explosion, it would be literally like being shot directly with an atomic bomb, having it explode on top of your body, and then walking away from that blast alive. Because that's basically what happened to Shepard based on the scale of the Citadel and where he was standing. We all know the scale and size of the Citadel. It's enormous, the size of a massive city, larger even. It's more like the size of a small country, and for the entire center ring to just go kablody with Shepard at the center core of the explosion, no man, woman, child, or even robot is going to walk away from that blast alive. It's just impossible. I don't care what type of technology is in the Mass Effect universe. Shepard should be deader than dead. He should be so dead that the word dead makes it sound like Shepard went to a candy store. In layman's terms, there is zero chance he should be alive, yet he is. The next one is another highly talked about death-causing situation, that Shepard is out in space without a helmet on. We spoke of this earlier, and I talked about how I thought I read something somewhere, but could not confirm the authenticity of that Casey Hudson said somewhere that the Citadel has a protective force field around it, creating an atmosphere. Great. Well, even if that was true before, it sure is not now, because the very core of the entire place just got blown to high hell and back. Whatever was producing that atmosphere should now be completely gone. And even for whatever reason, if it isn't, Shepard should now be outside of that atmosphere anyway from the force of the blast. Whatever debris Shepard is currently laying on should have been propelled far and wide into the vast ocean of space, where there is no atmosphere, and therefore no air for Shepard to breathe. The pressure and vacuum of space should have made Shepard's head go splat in an instant, because that's just how space works. Yet he still survives that. In Mass Effect 2, Shepard died because he got propelled into space from the Normandy explosion, and that time he even had a helmet on and he wasn't even injured. This time, the story is no different, except for the fact that the explosion that propelled him into space this time was probably about 1,000 times stronger, and yet he doesn't die here while being put under the same circumstances, and this time also without a helmet? It's just impossible. It's not even improbable, it's actually impossible. But I am still not done with this yet. Shepard then should have made his descent back to Earth, and as any science professor can tell you, when something enters the Earth's atmosphere and descends back to Earth, it burns. In fact, this is also what happened to Shepard back in Mass Effect 2. Liara finds Shepard's body, but she claims that his body was so badly burnt that she didn't even recognize him. Miranda also states this during Mass Effect 2, that Shepard was, for lack of a better word, dead. And this time Shepard didn't even have a helmet on, a kinetic barrier, or even his armor like he did last time. So that's just yet another thing that should have killed him. And lastly, if Shepard still survived all of the above, then he definitely would have died when he slammed into the ground on Earth. Even landing in the ocean would be like landing into a cement wall because of how fast Shepard was going. It's simple physics. If you don't believe me with this one, well then you need to get educated, or you need to watch an episode of Mythbusters or something, because that's just how the world works. When you're making a descent back into the planet's atmosphere, and if you hit that ground at the same speed that you entered the atmosphere with, or even remotely close to it, you're dead no matter where you land. That's why people on planes, when they jump out, they have parachutes, because otherwise they're going to die. So honestly, there's just no logical way for Shepard to have survived during the Destroy ending, yet he does anyway. Oh, and if you're one of those critics who believes Shepard is laying in Citadel rubble in the ending cinematics rather than London rubble, despite the fact that it's quite obviously London rubble rather than Citadel rubble, as I explained and showed during the first documentary if you were paying attention, then I have bad news for you. If you're right, then Shepard still has to survive the descent back to Earth and the vacuum of space, which means he's going to die anyway, which means there was literally no point in the developers putting in that final breathing cutscene if they were just intending to kill him off again in the end anyway. It makes zero logical sense for him to be on the Citadel rubble, plain and simple, because he'll die in a matter of minutes anyway, making that cutscene a pointless waste of time. And BioWare was already pressed for time, remember? Making 2 CGI cutscenes, one for male Shep and one for femme Shep, only to turn around and go, "Lols, just kidding, he's still going to die," would be the biggest middle finger any company has ever given to any fanbase. Therefore, the only humanly possible way for Shepard to have survived all of this is if it were just a dream. There's literally no other explanation. And if BioWare chooses to ignore this and or doesn't fully offer us an explanation come DLC time, then they're going to lose a huge amount of fans, myself included, forever. Because when it comes right down to it, the only explanation for Shepard surviving all of the above is if it turns out that it never physically happened to begin with. It doesn't get much more confirmed than this, people. Now, the very last piece of evidence that takes place within the game's shown events is the final sequence of the game. Everybody was asking about this in the first documentary, saying, "What about the old man and the little boy at the very end after the credits?" Well, honestly, I've got no idea who they are. Well, actually, I guess I do have an idea or two, but they're not really important, so I'm not going to waste my time with it. What is important is that a lot of people just genuinely didn't understand this part, and a few others even thought that BioWare had already disproven the indoctrination theory by showing the final statement of, "Commander Shepard has ended the Reaper threat, blah blah blah." To me, that's all still just a part of Shepard's final dream. Remember how we're 100% certain that the new planet that the Joker and the Normandy lands on is a dream? Well, if the final planet is a dream, then so is the whole entire ending cinematic following when Shepard makes his choice, and this is included in that. So to me, this final scene of the old man talking to his son or grandson or whoever they are isn't necessarily very important for or against the theory, it's just kinda there. Now, doing my best to analyze it both ways according to the theory, here's what I think. I believe Shepard desperately wants to believe that he made the right decision, indoctrination theory or not, and therefore he is dreaming this part in an attempt to think that he lived on as a legacy far into the future. Now, in both cases of whether or not the indoctrination theory is right or wrong, the whole one more story thing is very eluding. It means BioWare already came into the situation planning to release new single-player DLC. Because of how important this is, I'm going to say it again. This scene proves that BioWare planned on doing more single-player DLC before they even released the game to the public. Normally that makes sense for a game in the Mass Effect series, but not if it's supposed to be the last one. Why would somebody play new single-player DLC if they've already beaten the game and said DLC doesn't directly relate to the ending in any way? Unless it does relate to the ending. Are you picking up what I'm putting down? I'm saying it's a possibility that BioWare planned for this ending revamp all along, because they knew just how bad it was when they released it, all thanks to EA rushing it. And guess what? That fits some of the rumors and news leaks that we've been seeing over the last few months since the game's original release. Rumors from a purported ex-staff member who said BioWare already had a single-player DLC in the works to take place after the events of the game, and this was before Mass Effect 3 even was released. It syncs up perfectly with this now. But, because there isn't honestly any solid evidence other than wild speculation here, I'm going to have to go with a plausible on this one, based on the fact that this ending scene could be helping the indoctrination theory. It's really hard to say one way or another though. Alternatively, this one more story thing sets the stage for the potential of yet another Mass Effect game, which is something I know many of you have wanted me to talk about. Maybe the story isn't over yet and the DLC is going to act as a transition between Mass Effect 3 and Mass Effect 4. But don't get too excited because I'd bet 10 to 1 that we are not going to see another Mass Effect game, at least not related to this storyline. BioWare has already said that they're making new Mass Effect games according to the Mass Effect universe, but that doesn't mean it's going to be about the story we've come to know and love. However, there's always the possibility that this one more story thing is actually insinuating that there will be yet another Mass Effect game in this storyline. All BioWare technically said was, Shepard's story is over after Mass Effect 3, but the Mass Effect universe will go on. They didn't say that the entire storyline is over, just Shepard's story. That might mean that if there is a Mass Effect 4 that we'll be playing as a new hero, possibly Anderson, or even Major Coates, or even one of our beloved squad mates, to finish the job with. I mean, it makes sense because realistically, Shepard should not be getting up from that laser strike by Harbinger. He should be as dead as a doormat, or at the very least in serious critical condition for a prolonged period of time, meaning that someone else should have to take up arms and finish it. To me, that flows much better with the storyline than what we've seen so far. A man or woman just doesn't get up after a hit like that. Again though, I really doubt that they're going to make a Mass Effect 4, I just don't see it happening. But, do you know what the strongest piece of supporting evidence for there potentially being a Mass Effect 4 is? There's two, actually. EA and money. EA loves money. It's like their lifeblood, they'll do anything to get it, even if it means effectively ruining a beloved storyline just to eke out one more game in a series to tie loose ends up. They'll do it. They've done it before, no reason they won't try to do it now to one of the biggest series of all time. All they have to do is call BioWare and be like, yo, make it work or else. And if they don't do it, EA will find someone else who will. Seriously, it's pretty simple math. EA loves money. Mass Effect games equals money. After next year, a lot of the famous EA franchises are going to be done. Dead Space 3, for example, and Mass Effect 3 was already supposed to be over now, among a few others. They need to keep the money pit rolling, so how do you do that? Keep a series going for longer than it's supposed to go while you look for another money pit. It makes sense from an assholey, money-grubbing, evil corporation point of view. But from a consumer's point of view, that's us, it makes no sense to keep the series going. It was supposed to end at 3, plain and simple, and BioWare has been telling us that the DLC is going to be the closure we were looking for. With that in mind, despite how evil and hungry and powerful EA is, I still think that there's going to be a Mass Effect 4. I'd buy it, so to me, the whole possibility of there being a Mass Effect 4 sounds plausible, but in reality, I think it's busted because you can't really do a Mass Effect 4 without Shepard, and Shepard was pretty screwed up from the ending of Mass Effect 3. But honestly, I wouldn't put it past EA, and that's why this is staying at plausible, even though simple logic says it shouldn't be. I've still got one more fun thing to talk about in reference to the Shepard final cutscene thing. Did you know that the picture was yet another completely 100% ripped off piece of work? Well, maybe I'm not being fair here. I don't think BioWare just stole a piece of artwork from somebody without asking. Although, you know that Lower Afterlife Club song in Mass Effect 2? They didn't tell the artist that they used the song in the game. He found out when he heard it, so it's possible. I mean, they also did use an obvious stock photo, just doctored it up a bit, as Tally's face, so this is just another example of how they did that. I don't think BioWare just outright stole anything though. It might be the lazy way out, sure, but in this particular instance, when we have a rushed ending, perhaps that is a good excuse to do some quick searching and just doctor up yet another image that was already out. And furthermore, it's not like they just went with the first image that they saw. Mike Gamble has already addressed this and said that they've gone through thousands and thousands and thousands of photos in every instance, with the example of Tally's face, so I'm sure that they did it with this instance as well. But I'm not explaining the main point here. How do I know that BioWare didn't make this image? Because there's a song out that was produced somewhere between the years of 2000 and 2003 by a group called Winter Sun. In a YouTube video for the song, the background image that we see is the exact same thing as the one that we see at the end of Mass Effect 3 with the old guy and the kid. All Mass Effect 3 did was add in those two character models. Everything else about the picture is exactly the same. This is another piece of evidence that was also showed to me by someone on the CleverNoob forums named Excelsispio. I spoke with him earlier, but I've left out the best part. The name of the song? Starchild. Yep, you heard me right. There's a song that actually came out sometime in the early 2000s named Starchild, and the YouTube video for it that was uploaded on July 6, 2011, before Mass Effect was released and still being worked on, has the same background image that Mass Effect 3 used. This evidence is so damning on BioWare's part. Oh, and the lyrics? They're basically about the Starchild from Mass Effect 3. So, obviously BioWare crafted the idea of the Starchild in Mass Effect 3 based upon this song. This is more than a coincidence, my friends, but does it have to do with the indoctrination theory? Well, the entire song is a metaphor for indoctrination to begin with, and when reading the lyrics quite literally, there are some strange similarities. This means one of two things. BioWare is an evil maniacal genius that planned this all along, and this is one of the pieces of evidence that they left for us to find, or it means that EA was pressuring them early on, as we know, and they had to come up with some quick solutions like this one. This is getting plausible because while it's very obvious that BioWare used it, it doesn't 100% relate to the indoctrination theory. There are similarities, sure, and like I said, the song is a metaphor for indoctrination, but that doesn't 100% automatically confirm it. And before I continue any further, let's not be mad at BioWare for borrowing some ideas or basing some ideas off of other people's content. That's how good content is created. It's an idea of everybody, and to one thing, just like this indoctrination theory. But since we're talking about BioWare leaving clues, well, ever since Mass Effect 2 was released, BioWare has sent out a bunch of images on their Facebook and Twitter page that were basically scannable UPC codes. I'm sure you've seen this type of image before in your life somewhere. Scan them and you get a binary code, that 1010101 crap. When you break them down, they mean something. A handful of indoctrination theorists have been reading into these codes as meaning that BioWare has planned this all along and has been using these images as proof. I disagree. The first one that was posted on November 17, 2010 is the atomic mass of the element iron. Get it? The atomic mass, like Mass Effect? Anyway, the second one, also posted on the same day, is the temperature of 128.5 degrees Fahrenheit, or 89 degrees Celsius. This is the lowest temperature ever recorded on Earth at Vostok, Antarctica. There's also a Vostok system in the Mass Effect universe. Now we're getting somewhere because now we know that these clues have something to do with the Mass Effect universe as opposed to another BioWare game. The next image takes us to the United Kingdom Secret Service website, located in, guess where, London, right across from Big Ben. The next one gives us an image for the cover album of The Clash, The Singles. That album cover was used for London Calling, which is all about London that was written about World War II. These lyrics are also eerily similar to some of the things we've seen in Mass Effect 3. Okay, so Mass Effect 3 is taking place in London, according to this, which we know turned out to be true. So now finally we get something that translates into the image of a red herring. Traditionally, red herrings mean something is awry, not to trust somebody. It means that it's a clue that was intended to be misleading or distracting from the main point. And that was the last image released on December 6th, 2010. Okay, fine, it's weird, but does it really mean anything? I say no, and the only reason I wanted to talk about these codes in the first place is because I've seen it picking up a lot of momentum on the BioWare forums, and I hate it when people cling to bad evidence. Why is this bad evidence? Because all it does is tell us that Mass Effect 3 has something to do with London on Earth, which now we know is true since we've all played it. All of those codes make sense, except for one, the red herring. After all of these codes, maybe we're seeing the red herring as the final one because they're trying to tell us not to trust somebody. Whether it's the guy in the trailer, who we find out later is Major Coates as revealed in Mass Effect 3, who just so happened to be sitting aboard Big Ben, which is right across the street from the Secret Service in London. That was released along with those images, that image of him with the trailer. Or whether they're telling us not to trust the Star Child. Or it could be somebody else for all we know. We already know that the other UPC images have been proven true, so obviously this red herring image is telling us not to trust something else. But what? BioWare is telling us not to trust somebody. Maybe it was even EA, who knows? Or maybe they're just having a laugh at us. All I know is I find this evidence to be really weak, despite how it gets all of our conspiracy blood boiling. But at the very end of all of that, even though I'm saying this, because most of the codes were already confirmed by the events of Mass Effect 3, then that means that the red herring is more than just a steaming pile of crap. It means they put the red herring image in after the rest of those images for a reason. And like I said, all of those other UPC images turned out to be true, having meaning within Mass Effect 3. I really don't believe it has anything to do with the ending of Mass Effect 3, but rather just alluding to what Mass Effect 3 is supposed to be about. But again, maybe they are putting in the red herring at the end of the images to tell us that something is wrong at the end of Mass Effect 3. Who knows, or maybe as I said, it's a reference to Major Coates, who I've already called innocent, and still think of as innocent, but it's interesting, so this gets a plausible. Now, there are only a few more things I want to go over before I leave you today. Always end on a strong note, right? So, we'll end with the hope that the extended cut DLC will bring what we want to see. So here's some evidence that shows why the extended cut DLC should be relevant to the indoctrination theory. As a forethought, some critics have been saying that BioWare has already discounted the indoctrination theory. They're saying that BioWare already claimed that the extended cut DLC is only adding in new cutscenes at the end, and that's that. But guess what, critics? You're wrong. In this BioWare press conference, Michael Gamble, producer at BioWare, when talking about the extended cut DLC, specifically states,
"We want to make sure that when you see the ending of Mass Effect, you now have the information and the context to feel satisfied." And in general, we're really excited to be doing it. So bear with us over the next couple months while we work on it, and it will come out, again, it will come out free. And currently, we're shooting for a generic summer release, but we're going to put the time and the effort into it that it takes. We're not going to rush it, but it's going to be done well. It's more than just a few cinematic scenes. It's more than just a small coat of paint. It is definitely a considerable amount, and so we're happy to be doing it.
He quite literally said, more than just a few cutscenes, more than just a coat of paint. There are two different ways to experience the narrative of a video game. The first is with cutscenes. The second is with gameplay. There are no other ways other than this. Black and white, plain and simple, there are just no other ways to deliver a storyline of a video game other than cutscenes and actual gameplay. So if Gamble says that the extended cut DLC is going to be more than just a few cutscenes, then we are obviously getting gameplay. There's just no two ways about it. If the extended cut DLC ends up not having gameplay, then I think it's safe to say that nobody is ever going to buy another BioWare game ever again. But hold that though, I'm going to jump on it again in a minute. Later on in the press conference, Chris Priestley, the BioWare community manager, who I've had the pleasure of briefly talking to on the first documentary, asks Gamble to respond to the indoctrination theory. This is his response.
Okay, so first of all, the indoctrination theory kind of illustrates, again, how committed the fan base is. Here's the thing. The thing is, we don't want to comment either way on it, and here's why. We don't want to be prescriptive for how people interpret the ending, especially with the extended cut DLC coming out. We don't want to, again, be prescriptive with how people should think things ended. We want the content to speak for itself, and we'll let it do so. So that's all we'll say.
Wow, guys. Wow. That's quite possibly one of the biggest supporting pieces of evidence to date because it came straight from the horse's mouth. Let's break down what he said. We don't want to comment on it either way, and here's why. We don't want to be prescriptive about how people interpret the ending. Okay, so they don't want to tell us ahead of time what the ending is. Gotcha. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Because if they don't want to prescribe an ending to us prior to the extended cut DLC, then that means we are supposed to believe in the indoctrination theory on our own. Understand? We want the content to speak for itself, and we'll let it do so. So that's all we'll say. And then he gives an evil genius smirk like he knows there's more to what he's saying. Okay, so the content is going to provide us with an answer to the indoctrination theory. Gotcha. But the way in which Gamble responds the entire time leads us to believe that he is effectively saying yes, but can't tell us because the DLC hasn't been released yet. Makes perfect sense to me. The tone in his voice, his body language, and even what he says points to the fact that there's actually something to the indoctrination theory after all. Because if it were wrong, he'd have no reason not to tell us that we're wrong and would have said something along the lines of, no, it's not the correct theory, but the ending of the extended cut DLC, which I can't currently talk about because it hasn't been released yet, will still answer all of the same questions. Doesn't it sound like a more appropriate answer if the indoctrination theory were wrong? But he didn't say that. All he did was smirk and say wait and see. There's really not any benefit in him keeping the hope alive of the indoctrination theory if it's just going to be wrong in the end. That would just piss off people even more, especially all of us indoctrination theory fans, which actually happen to be the vast majority of Mass Effect 3 fans now. But what about artistic integrity? If we are 100% going to receive the answer from the extended cut DLC, then doesn't artistic integrity fly out the window? You can't have a 100% clarified canon ending and simultaneously maintain your artistic integrity. So why'd they tell us that way back when this debacle started? Maybe that was just a line of crap they fed us in order to get us to temporarily believe them because they honestly didn't know at the time what approach they were going to take to fix the ending, which is exactly what I believe happened. They didn't know what to do and will now adopt or at least partially adopt the indoctrination theory. Where does this press conference leave us? I'm going to say it leaves us with a strong plausible. The logic and reasoning is sound enough to make it a confirmed, but I don't want to jump the gun on this and make mountains out of anthills. It's not like he said yes it's true, but the main point to remember here is that he didn't say it wasn't true and there's no reason for him not to deny it if it isn't true. Understand? So super strong plausible here. Next, to coincide with what Gamble said about the ending being more than just a few cutscenes, some voice actors have confirmed that they have returned to the studios to do voiceover work. There was a big discrepancy way back when this information first came out because Jennifer Hale, the female voice actor for Shepard, was not invited back to the studio at first. Only Mark Meer was, the male voice actor. Because of this, the critics of the indoctrination theory went nuts and were all, see, it can't be the indoctrination theory if there won't be gameplay, and there can't be gameplay without female Shepard. But that's old news now because Jennifer Hale has been confirmed to be back in the recording studio, along with Mark Meer. In addition to the two Shepards, here is a list of further confirmed voice actors: Lance Henriksen, the man behind the voice of Admiral Hackett, Trisha Helfer, Edie, Raphael Sabarge, Caden, and Kimberly Brooks, Ashley. I've also read that Ali Hillis, who's Liara, and Brandon Keener, Garrus, were both confirmed as well. Additionally, when BioWare confirmed the extra credit DLC voiceover work, they also said that a number of voice actors would not be announcing their return, but would still be returning to the recording studio. An example of this would be the voice actor for Harbinger, because if they said that he was returning, then it's almost a 100% confirmation that the indoctrination theory is right. Same with if Martin Sheen, the Elusive Man, were to announce his return. Bearing this in mind, we can assume that there's quite literally something more than just a few cutscenes, just as Gamble has said, so this is a confirmed. Now, as I said earlier, always end on a strong note, so I'll end this with some very interesting tweets from BioWare staff. Huge thanks to Romy Barboza for pointing most of these out to me. These slew of tweets basically confirms a variety of different aspects of the indoctrination theory, some of it being stuff I've been talking about since the first documentary, and some of it in the second documentary. Combine all of these tweets together into a big ball of tweets, and then throw that ball at the other pieces of evidence I've shown you throughout these two documentaries, and we've got ourselves one hell of an interesting story, and it all points directly at the indoctrination theory. So, loyal viewer, where do we go from here? Is the indoctrination theory true? Only time will tell, and I'm pretty sure I've covered every single scrap of worthy evidence out there. But there is one thing I can promise you. Once the DLC drops, you will be seeing one of two things. Either a video of me dancing and singing the I Told You So song, or another documentary analyzing the new ending and what it could mean, if it still hasn't provided us with the closure that we need. Use hashtag IndocDoc or hashtag WakeUpShepherd to talk about the Indoctrination Theory documentary or the Indoctrination Theory in general on Twitter. Just remember one thing, it doesn't matter if the theory turns out to be wrong, as long as BioWare does right by all of us and gives us the ending they promised. On the other hand, if the indoctrination theory is wrong, and if the DLC still fails to answer all of these important questions and plot holes, expect to be a part of whatever uprising happens as the direct result, and expect to be seeing me there spearheading the whole thing. Now go, my little lambs, go off and graze in the glory that is Mass Effect. No, but seriously, thank you all for your incredible support since the first documentary, and I hope you enjoyed this one just as much. But this is not the end. Our relationship never has to end, provided that you come to our website, CleverNoob.com, and let me know what you want to see next. We've got awesome forums, CleverNoob.com/forums, with an awesome community that we want awesome you to be an awesome part of. So come join us and sound off on your opinions about the theory as well as other things related to us once again at CleverNoob.com, or more preferably, CleverNoob.com/forums, since that's where all the action is. So until next time, keep the hope alive, people, not just for the theory or even for video games, but in all facets of your life.
I will never surrender, will free the earth and sky, crush my heart into embers, and I will